Hi everyone, today we're diving into how you can keep your data safe by integrating our API scanning functionality with your application. With our event-based and retro-based scan models, you can scan objects after they've entered your storage volume. If you're looking to add another layer of protection by scanning objects before they ever enter your storage volume, our API scanning setup is a game changer. We'll walk through standing up the API scanning agent, configuring an API user to authenticate with, obtaining an API token, and then we'll explore the scan models available for API scanning. First, let's stand up our API agent. Log in to your AV console and go to the API agent settings page. From here, you'll need to select the region you'd like to stand up the endpoint in. After that, you'll need to configure your networking settings. Select a VPC and 2 subnets for your agent, plus 2 subnets for the load balancer that will sit in front of your scanning agents to act as the endpoint. The subnets you select need to be either public or private and must be in separate availability zones. If you use private subnets, you'll need to take into consideration accessing your endpoint from a network that has inbound access to the subnets. To keep things simple, today we will use public subnets. After that, define the initial CIDR range that will be allowed to access the endpoint. You can set a specific range, but for today we will make ours public. Since we're setting up a load balancer, we require you to use an SSL certificate for it that is associated with the domain you'll use for your endpoint. If you use public subnets, you can click on New Cert and set a subdomain under our cloudstoragesecapp.com domain. We will provide you with an SSL certificate issued by Cloud Storage Security in that case. If you use private subnets, you'll want to go to AWS Certificate Manager and either request or import a certificate that is valid and will be used for your endpoint domain. Finally, we'll want to check off whether we need the load balancer to be internet-facing or internal. Since we're using public subnets, it will be internet-facing for today. Once your networking settings are all set, you can edit the settings for the ECS service that will be set up. For today, we'll leave these as is. Finally, you can set your scanning engine options to either be the default settings you also use for event-based and retro-based scanning, or to be entirely separate. Along with antivirus scanning, you also have the ability to perform data classification on files via API too. For today, we'll just focus on AV. Once everything is set, you can click Save and let it all configure. Once our API scanning agent endpoint is set up, you'll notice we have the endpoint URL generated here. This is the URL you will use to perform API calls. If you used private subnets and your own SSL certificate, this URL will be the load balancer URL, and you'll need to create a CNAME record to point your domain you wish to use when accessing the endpoint to your load balancer URL. Before we can access the endpoint, we need a way to authenticate with our endpoint and fetch a bearer token. We do this through any user account which has API access enabled on it. You can enable it on your own user account or create a separate API user which will allow access to the API and nothing within the console. This way, you can use a separate password in your code for an account that has no admin capabilities. Just like a regular account you create, make sure to sign into the API user account and change the password before you use it. You should also enable API access for your user account. Now that we have our API endpoint stood up and our account set up, it's time to try scanning some files using the API. To do this, we'll be using Postman. If you're looking to get started with testing our API in Postman, we have Postman collection and environment files available in our help docs that you can download and import into Postman. This way, you don't have to spend time making the initial requests. In Postman, we'll first need to fetch our API token using the token call. In the body, we'll need to enter our username and password we set up for the API user. After that, we can request the token, copy it, and start using it. Now we can use the scan and return call to scan a file and return a result. We'll enter the token in the authorization section, and then we'll define the file we want to scan in the body. You can see once a scan is performed, a result is returned. Similar to our event-based and retro-based scanning functionality, problem file results will appear here as well. If you have an infected file, you'll see the result for that infected file will also show up here. Once the result is returned, you can have your application do just about anything you want with the file. You can upload it to an S3 bucket, an EBS volume, a database, or anywhere else. It's entirely up to you. Keep in mind, if you are handling the upload of the file yourself through your application, the object won't be tagged in S3 like it would be through our event-based scanning and retro-based scanning functionality. We also have other types of scan models available via API, including the ability to not only scan a file, but also upload it directly to an S3 bucket if it's found to be clean. Using the scan and upload model, we will tag the file in your S3 bucket with the scan result and date and time tags. You can also scan pre-existing files in your S3 buckets through the scanning API as well. Additionally, you can also scan via URL and return a result on the file associated with that URL as well. Whether you have an application, a web form, or anything else that you're looking to integrate our API scanning functionality into, it's a great way to be able to scan files before they get to your storage volume. If the files are found to be clean, they can be uploaded to your storage volume, and if they're found to be anything other than clean, you can show the end user a message informing them of the result or some type of error message if you don't want to inform them of the result directly. If you want to learn more about our API scanning functionality, you can go to help.cloudstorage.security.com, or if you have questions and want to speak with a member of our team, you can write us at support@cloudstorage.security.com. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope this makes implementing our API scanning functionality a little more clear and a little more straightforward. Stay secure and keep those storage volumes clean.